Hello, National University Academy and National University Virtual High School students. This is Mr. Goyette going over with you some content. Hold on here. Let me fix this lighting. It's a little bit too much. Okay. Going over with you the content for Unit 5. I'm going to discuss with you some of the content we reviewed for chapters 10 and 11, the triumph of white man's democracy, and slaves and masters. So we're getting through the Jeffersonian era, evaluating Jeffersonian democracy, and looking at the conflicts over the national bank, Jefferson's own opinions about the national bank, the attitudes within the public at this time about the power of the national bank. We just looked at Indian removal and a few other topics. Let's continue with the issue of the bank and Jefferson's move to stop the bank from going forward. Regarding Jackson's banking and fiscal policies, Henry Clay and his supporters in Congress contended that the president had exceeded the powers of his office. You can review this at the top of page 296. According to the Democrats of the 1840s, the role of the federal government should be to remove obstacles to individual economic, moral, and religious freedom. You can review this. This is under the heading of the heyday of the second party system. It's a very interesting section to read because you have it's interesting to contrast the two parties. Look on page 300 for more of that. What new political trend was considered by Jackson to be essential to democratic government? This would be the spoils system. I already mentioned that in the last YouTube review and explained what the spoils system was earlier, so please go back and review that if you do not recall what the spoils system is. You can look at page 289 in your textbook to also review the spoils system. The Romantic movement valued emotionalism and intuition over rationality. You'll remember that you have Mary Shelley, you have Percy Bysshe Shelley, you have Samuel Taylor Coleridge writing both Romantic and Gothic literature in England. And in the United States we have Melville, you have Hawthorne, and Edgar Allan Poe writing these dark stories, sometimes critical of the United States, sometimes very praiseworthy, praising nature and the beauty of nature. Showing that nature's beauty and power is not going to be able to be harnessed by man at any time, and that while science is making inroads into demystifying certain things about our lives as it relates to nature, that nature will always have this mystifying power over us. So they believed in this innate love of goodness, truth, and beauty that all people were thought to possess. You can review the definitions of the Romantic movement on page 280 of your text. The election of 1828 revealed the birth and triumph of mass democracy. They had these huge barbecues, these huge settings, parades, marches, big park events, what the Roman writer might have called the bread and circuses, the spectacle of politics. In this case, the election of 1828 was really more about personalities and mudslinging than it was about issues. You'll remember that Jackson had put out information in the press about Adams' wife being morally bankrupt, and they fired back at Jefferson with similar stories, people being born out of wedlock. I think it was Adams's wife was supposedly supposed to be born out of wedlock. Jefferson's wife wasn't divorced from her first husband when she married Jefferson. All these stories that were supposed to drum up controversy and force the public to question the morality of the candidate. This so they wouldn't have to talk about the issues on the that were at the core of the political race. The election of 1828, already got that one. The new Whig party is emerging at this time, and of course the Whigs A little bit different than the way we'd understand like a modern Republican Party or the modern Democrats. Some would say they're allied more with the Republicans. In other ways, if you look at the description, there are things that they're doing that they opposed Jackson on that would be closer to the Democratic Party today. So saying that one was Democratic or Republican doesn't really help us. You really have to read their platform to understand it. The Whigs, and you can read this on page 299, the Whigs characterize themselves as, the Whig Party believed that the role of government in regard to the economy was to become a positive liberal state with the responsibility of protecting industry and contributing to economic progress. Now, if you contrast that with the description of the Democrats I just gave to you, their platform about removing obstacles to living freely, their platforms were almost identical, and they both. The Whigs said that the Democrats had a negative liberal state, and the Whigs said that they had a positive liberal state. However they chose to define those, you can read up on that on page 299. The new hotels of the 1820s were obviously Democratic, in contrast to previous hotels and in the 1820s, because they extended personal service previously available only to the privileged class, particularly anyone who could afford to pay. So if you look on page 278, you'll see there that what was happening was in the book, the chapter 10 goes into describing the society in America and how it's changing. And one of the things it's pointing out is that society is leveling a bit. Obviously, you still have slavery, you still have these egregious problems with basic human rights that conflict with our Declaration of Independence, but you also have the situation where the elitism and the social classes are starting to disintegrate a bit, become a little less differentiated, where a person who has the money can go to the hotel, whereas before, if you were of a particular class, you could not go and get service at that particular hotel. By the 1850s, the economy in the Deep South was dependent upon the sale and export of short staple cotton, not long staple cotton. Tobacco, rice, and log staple variety cottons were grown profitably before this time, but in the 1850s, it was short staple cotton that really protected slavery and kept it going. Otherwise, the South would have had a difficulty keeping itself alive based on the plantation lifestyle. So it was the Deep South was dependent upon the sale and export of short staple cotton, page 324 to review that. In their day-to-day activities, most large plantation owners were shrewd, hardworking business people. And most pre-Civil War Southern whites were simple yeoman farmers. Most whites were not plantation owners. You can review this on page 319. They lived in the backcountry where slaves and plantations were rarely seen, so the yeoman farmers made up a larger portion of the white South. They were not poor, shiftless whites. They were also hardworking whites, but they didn't live the plantation lifestyle. In the 1850s, most pre-Civil War white Southerners believed that slavery provided benefits to all involved, including the slaves. And if you review page 321, it'll list some of the reasons for white Southerners continuing to believe that slavery was beneficial for everyone. And one of the areas that they'll do this is what they'll say, that the Bible sanctions slavery, and they'll mention St. Paul in Ephesians and in Colossians. If you look at Ephesians chapter 6, 5, you'll see 6-5, 6 through 6-9. You can read over this. Also look in Colossians in the Bible, 3:22 through 3:25, and the book of Titus, 3-9 to 3-10. All of them saying how the slave should be in total servitude to the master, and that the master should treat them with a certain amount would not be harsh toward them, but nonetheless, they're the master. So the Bible was used to defend slavery.